Good morning, all of you. I welcome you all to Ansarkari, and today we are going to discuss the important articles from 24th of December's newspaper. So we'll be taking up The Hindu and the Financial Express. So the first article is about that 81 crore people are going to get free food grains for 1 year. So our Union Cabinet has decided to provide free food grains to all 81 crore beneficiaries that are covered under the National Food Security Act for 1 year. And they will now get 35 kg of food grains a month for free. And center has estimated that the cost that it is going to incur on this is going to be around rupees 2 lakh crores. So we can say that government is taking a pro-poor stand, and that is going to happen under the Prime Minister's Garib Kalyan Ann Yojana, which ensures 5 kg of food grains for free for the poor people. So even that goes free. And considering the economic situation, inflation and unemployment, this decision has been taken by the Union Cabinet. So currently, the amount or the cost that the poor people or the beneficiaries of the scheme that they had to pay for getting wheat, rice and coarse grains was they had to pay rupees 2 for wheat per kg, and rupees 3 per kg for rice, and rupees 1 per kg for the coarse cereals. So that was the cost. And talking about a little analysis about is that obviously it is going to add fiscal pressure on the government. Fiscal deficit may increase. Then instead of, we can say that this is obviously going to be a short term measure. So instead of focusing more upon this, incurring so much of expenditure here, we could have shifted this expenditure at something which would be generating more employment opportunities. That is obviously going to be a permanent thing. So that could have been one thing which could have been done, and how this amount of expenditure would have been used. So that is there. And this is, we can say, this is the revenue expenditure and not the capital expenditure. So instead of focusing more upon revenue expenditure, the government should focus more upon capital expenditure. So that is the thing. Then the nasal COVID vaccine has been approved, and it is going to be available as a booster shot. So if you haven't taken the booster shot, please go ahead with that. And the vaccine is named as Incovac. So this is going to be the world's first intranasal vaccine approved for use. And the vaccine, it is also named as BBV154. So it has received the approval in November for restricted use. And now it is going to be available for as a booster shot also. Then talking about the Civil Aviation Regulator, that is the Director General of Civil Aviation, it proposes a full refund and free travel for seat downgrade on flights. Obviously, this step right now, like it has not been, it is just a proposal and obviously taken in consumer interest. So domestic and international airlines, they could soon be required to refund the full ticket value. Firstly, you'll get the entire refund, and secondly, you'll be getting obviously a free travel if you get a downgraded seat. Suppose you had booked a business or a premium economy class seat, but now when you're traveling, you have been downgraded to economy class. So in that case, you will get a full refund and you will be allowed a free travel. So that is just a proposal, and let's see whether it is finalized or not. And again, as I just said, that it is being taken in the consumer's interest. Then Kerala farmer uses UAVs, that is the unmanned aerial vehicles, in his plantation. So basically, he's using the drone technology. And what is the, we can say, the main thing that comes out of this article is that we need to emphasize more on training the farmers when it comes to using the drones on their fields. So we are lacking there. However, like we have the drone technology, so now the next step comes is training the farmers as to how should they, they should be using this new technology to their advantage. So a progressive farmer in Kerala's Wayanad, he has trained himself in this technology. And talking about what can be the benefits of using drone technology in the fields. So aerial spraying is just, we can say, a minimal application of this technology. Then the major advantage of this technology is the access to real-time information on the field. And selective application of weedicides, fertilizers, and micronutrients can be done in a precision farming. It can be done in a precision way, in a precision manner. So that is another benefit. And drones can also improve agricultural practices at a low cost. So until few years ago, we had been relying on satellite images for the agricultural needs, but now drones, they have made it more accessible and they're real time. So that is there and they're more precise. So the advantage of drone imaging is more accurate and precise than the satellite images, and weather conditions would also not affect the drone imaging that was happening in case of using the satellite imageries. So that is, we can say we have talked about so many benefits of using drone technology in the fields, and where we lack or what should be the next step is that we need to ensure training our farmers in the usage of this drone technology. Coming to the editorial page, so this article, the first one, it is talking about the high cost of private healthcare and how it should be basically reduced, and what should be the public expenditure when it comes to providing healthcare services. So we'll be obviously going through the data as well. So in the beginning, we'll be looking at what is the current situation through the data. So we know that India ranks poorly on multiple health financing indicators, and India's public health expenditure as a percentage of its GDP is very low, that is 1.2%, and the share of general government expenditure dedicated to health, that is 4.8%, remains akin to the poorest countries. So that is the current scenario, and per capita health spending growth has not kept pace with the rising incomes also. That is another thing. And private spending still constitutes nearly 60% of the overall expenditure on health. So we can say that our out-of-pocket expenditure is really high when it comes to the private healthcare services. So the private sector in India is inexorably dispersed, and it is marked with inequalities between rural and the urban areas, and there is widespread market failure. So here you should be knowing that what do we mean by market failure. So it is basically, we can say that the quality of services are not equal, or they are not present in an equal or similar manner everywhere. So we can say there is inefficiency of resource distribution. So that's why we are using this term as market failure when we're talking about the private sector healthcare services that are there. Obviously, we know that the quality of the services, the amount of the services, they are different in rural and the urban areas. So however, unlike in the USA, so we'll be looking at what is the case in USA or how things are working there. So USA, it managed care models where the response to the cost pressures, the typical Indian context of the income disparities, backwardness, and the underregulation incentivized the private sector to differentiate into a host of organizations of varying sizes and scopes, each serving its own customer base. So, in such a scenario, initiatives that seek to make the private healthcare more affordable without affecting the care quality assume importance. So, here we are talking about, firstly, we need to bring down the cost of private healthcare and ensure that quality is not deteriorated. So public health insurance schemes, they have also often been reproached for imposing unreasonable package rates on impaneled private providers with a weak regard for the actual cost of care. So this is in terms of health insurance, and there is already an emergent drift towards value-based healthcare, which seeks to improve patient outcomes for the money spent. So that is there. That is, we can say, what is the patient or the consumer of the healthcare services is looking for. And talking about the market failure in the healthcare, so Canada, it have conceived regional health boards that organize care equitably within the regions, exploit economies of scale, and bring down the healthcare cost. So that's how we can say how Canada has dealt with this, the situation of market failure in healthcare. It has just, we can say, come up with the regional health boards. So we can say having a decentralized approach and organizing the healthcare services equitably within all the regions as per their needs, and exploiting the economies of scale, which obviously helps in bringing down the healthcare cost. So that is the Canada model, and you can cite this in your answers. And talking about the double whammy in India. So in Indian healthcare story, there has been a double whammy of regulatory infirmity, there is no proper regulation, and then unfulfilled economic promises. So we can say these are two double whammies that exist in the Indian healthcare system. And many states, they have their own clinical establishment acts that are struck short of full implementation. And the high cost of medical education also triggered the cost recovery through resource intensive ways of the practice. So since the medical education is so much expensive, so once we can say the students, they become doctors, so they try to, we can say, retrieve that cost through, charging high prices to the patients. And this warrants policy attention. So higher medical cost is also one of the concerns. So even this requires a policy attention, and different states, they have different acts, but even they have not been implemented fully and effectively. So no country in the world has ever achieved universal healthcare through predominantly private means. So this means the public sector also needs to come to the forefront, and affordable private healthcare must only come to supplement the strong public healthcare. So it does not mean that when we are talking about reducing the cost of private healthcare and maintaining the quality, that the role of a public sector finishes, or there is no role of the public sector when it comes to providing the healthcare services. So that is not the case. The things, they should work in a synergetic manner. So that is, we can take out from this article. And talking about what how India is going to deal with the cervical cancer. So the Lancet published this month the report that it published this month, which shows that India accounts for the highest number of cervical cancers cases in Asia, followed by China. So cervical cancer, it is a preventable and treatable cancer. It is caused by infection with the human papilloma virus, that is HPV, and there are vaccines which protect against the carcinogenic HPV. So we have vaccines, and cervical cancers, they are preventable, they are treatable. And the Lancet report shows that India accounts for the highest number of cervical cancer cases in Asia, followed by China. So WHO has specified that countries, they must reach and maintain an incidence rate of fewer than 4 new cases of cervical cancers per 1 lakh women a year. And to achieve that goal, it is necessary that 90% of the girls will have to be fully vaccinated with the HPV vaccine by the age of 15. So in order to, we can say, eradicate cervical cancer cases from India, we need to ensure that 90% of the girls, they are vaccinated fully before the age of 15. And the government now intends to introduce this HPV vaccine in its universal immunization program. And talking about the India's immunization network, so it has definitely worked well, and we have seen that in case of COVID-19 vaccination program also. So we saw that we have been successful in completely eradicating polio and maternal and neonatal tetanus from India through this universal immunization program that we have, and the strong immunization network that exists in India. And that is definitely going to help us when we are talking about providing the vaccinations under this program to vaccinations for the cervical cancer. And so now the government, it has taken a step, it has decided to offering free vaccines for at least 12 diseases. Okay, so this is basically the government is providing free vaccines for 12 diseases under this UIP program. And now to battle with this cervical cancer, India is expected to roll out the indigenously developed Cervavac vaccine by mid 2023, and it has also received the Drugs Controller General of India's approval also. So that is the plan that we are going to implement to deal with cervical cancer and show that there is a link between. So there are different studies which show that there exists a link between cervical cancer incidence and the Human Development Index values. So with progressively lower rates observed as the HDI rises. So we see that the link that exists between these two factors is that the cervical cancer cases, they reduce as the value, or we can say the quality of human life improves. And together with vaccination, screening programs, they must be conducted to detect the early signs of the disease to allow time for treatment. So that is all about cervical cancer and how basically we are going to implement the plan that we have. So it was given a very comprehensive manner. And then let's move forward. So talking about the moa makers, so moa, it is a popular Bengal sweet which already has a GI tag, and we are seeing a rise in the manufacturers of moa, and it has got an extension of 10 years. Basically, it will be having the GI tag for the next 10 years, and it is a popped rice ball which is held together with fresh date palm, jaggery, and Joynagar Moa. It got the GI tag in 2015. So you can see in the picture, that's how it looks. And it is made of aromatic khoi that is mixed with jaggery, sugar, cashew nuts, and raisins. So it is, we can say, one of the healthy sweets that we have, and that comes from West Bengal. So Russia says that it may cut its oil output given the price cap that has been imposed on it. So that is, we can say, kind of a warning that has been issued by Russia, and obviously it is going to have global repercussions if it finally decides to cut the oil output by 7% early next year. So let's see how it turns out to be and how things are going to be. So, given the COVID surge in China and other economies, and the US Fed saying that it is going to increase the rate of interest in future, and that too by higher amounts. So we saw that it has impacted the capital market, and it has fallen. Sensex falls by 1.6%. So that's how we say that basically there has been one observation that the past 5 weeks gain that we were witnessing in the capital market, and it also touched an all-time high. We saw that all those gains in past 5 weeks were completely vanished in just 1 week's fall. So that's how we can say that's how was the strength of the performance of the capital market. And obviously it shows that the global economy is not that strong that we are going to move upwards. Plus we have the basically predictions that are we really heading towards a recession or not. So given that, that has been how the capital market performing. Talking about that global slowdown is not mirrored in India. So that is what our finance ministry has to say. And cautious optimism as the slowdown in the global economic activity is not mirrored in the performance of India, given our high frequency indicators performance. So what are these high frequency indicators? Firstly, the private consumption. So this has been bolstered by the pent up demand, and it reached its highest among all the second quarters during the past 11 years. So that is, we can say, that is basically private consumption is strong because of the pent up demand. Second is that the investment rate also rose to be the highest among all the second quarters since 2012-13 at 34.6% of the GDP. So that is, we can say, the investment rate. And the easing of retail and wholesale inflation in November is, it also gives us a certain amount of relief, and moderation in households inflation expectations. So that is, these are the high frequency indicators on the basis of which we are saying that the global slowdown is not going to affect India so much. Talking about the engineering goods exports, so they have slided by 40% in November, and basically to China. So engineering exports, they account for about a quarter of India's total goods exports. So you should be knowing about that. And talking about again the economy, so vigilance is a critical aspect in maintaining India's external resilience. So obviously we need to be cautious, we need to be precautious, and need to keep a vigil on how things are changing globally. So let's take up the Financial Express now. Okay, so we are starting with the editorials page, and you can see that this article is extremely important. And this is from Economy. So here we are talking about how Indian economy saw structural change, how it was changing gradually, and the structural changes were not so rapid, and how once we can say a structural change was achieved, several changes were happening simultaneously, and post COVID-19, how things have reversed back again. So the gains that we had experienced, now we are again back to the square one, and that is obviously because of COVID-19. So let's start with this article. So is the Indian economy marching backwards? And we see that as the non-farm job growth fell post 2013, the rate of exit from the agriculture too fell. So we can say there is a link between these two, that as the non-farm job growth was falling, the rate of exit from the agriculture was also falling. So more and more people were not migrating out of the agriculture sector, and this challenged the structural shift that marked the high growth years of India. Now, since economics Nobel winner, that is Simon Kuznets, he won an economics Nobel Prize. So he says that structural transformation of all economies is characterized by two simultaneous phenomena. So when do you say that an economy is undergoing a structural change? So there are two things according to Simon Kuznets. So the first one is a structural shift in terms of the contribution of the three main sectors, that is agriculture, industry, and services, to the GDP in favor of the non-farm sectors. So if we can say the basically the growth in these three main sectors of the economy comparing to their share in the GDP is happening in favor of non-farm sectors, then we say that structural change are happening. And the second thing is that total employment in the economy, so with a shift away from agriculture towards the other two main sectors. So the first towards industry, then followed by the services. So that's how we can say the share of employment needs to change when we are saying that an economy is undergoing a structural change. So the pace of structural change in India's economy, it has been slow since 1950, and between 1950 and 1980, during India's so-called Hindu rate of growth of 3.5%. So during this period from 1950 to 1980, India was experiencing a Hindu's rate of growth that is been 3.5%. So the contribution of agriculture to India's GDP fell slowly from 54% to 38%. And meanwhile, during the same period, the rise of industry was also reflected in its share rising from 14% to 23% during the same time period. So we can say through this data, we can say that obviously India was undergoing a structural change. However, the pace of it was very slow. And the figure shows that the share of agriculture fell from 54% to 38, it fell from 54% to 38%. And that of industry, it rose from 14% to 23%. Now, manufacturing contribution to GDP, it began to grow with the import substitution industrialization strategy that we adopted during the first 3 5-year plans, that is from 1950 to 1966, and it rose from 14.5% in 1960 to 17.5% in 1980. So that's how specifically we are talking about what has been the share and the performance of the manufacturing sector and its contribution to GDP. So even the share of manufacturing sector was increasing, that of agriculture was falling, that of industry was increasing. So we are seeing one shift when it comes to their contribution to the GDP. And the main marker of the proper structural change is a rising share of manufacturing in output, as was seen in East Asia. So this is, we can say, a clear or the main marker of a proper structural change that happens in the rising share of the manufacturing in output. So the share of manufacturing, it unfortunately, it was falling from 1980 to 1990. Basically, it fell from 17.5% to 15.7%. And although after that, it picked up after the economic reforms of 1991, and it again rose to 17.7%. Then it again fell to 15.7% by 2000s, and recovering only after 2004. So that's how we can say it has not been growing at a steady rate upwards, and it remained between 16 to 17% between 2004 and 2012, stabilizing at that level. So this is, we are talking about the share of the manufacturing sector, and it has been more or less been around 16 to 17% post 2004 and 2000 between 2004 and 2012. And however, after demonetization, we see that it led to the consequent destruction of the unorganized and the MSME manufacturing. Obviously, we had the GST also after that. So there was gradual decline in the share of manufacturing from the stable 16 to 17% of the GDP, and it fell each year, reaching 13% in 2020 before barely it recovered to just 14% in 2021. So here you are getting the latest data, and please, all the data that we are discussing, that I'm just explaining you, is very important to note that down at one place. And so there was an absolute fall in the total manufacturing employment from 2016 to 2019 for the first time in India's post 1991 history. So that was there, and the trajectory of the structural change that was underway, it has been aborted, and even we can say that has been reversed back. And this happened despite our emphasis, our so much of giving importance to Make in India campaign. So despite that, we are seeing an absolute fall in the manufacturing sector's employment share between 2016 and 2019. So another phenomenon is the last 2 years that we see, they are truly astounding. So one dimension of the structural change is that not only is there a relative fall of the agriculture in the total workforce, but as the non-farm work grows, there should have been an absolute fall in the numbers in the agriculture also. So this is, we can say, an ideal situation. But from 1950 onwards, for half a century, that is from 1950 to 2000, the pace of the structural change, it was so slow until 2004-5, that while the share of the total employment in the agriculture, it was consistently falling, but the absolute numbers of workers, they were still rising in the agriculture. However, the absolute number should have also been falling, but that did not happen in case of India, and the share of agricultural employment in the total workforce was still 74%, while the workforce contributed only 44% to India's GDP. And this was because the absolute number of, we can say, workers were not falling in the agricultural sector. So 74% of the workforce in agriculture contributing only 44% to the GDP. Then there were certain more changes, and agriculture's contribution, it further fell down to 25% of the GDP by 2001, but still the share of employment was as high as 60% in 2000. So that is there, and GDP growth rate picked up after 2003-4 at 8% per annum, a rate that was maintained till 2013-14 on average. So we can say during this period, this was the most crucial period when we saw a stark change in structural change, I should say, in the Indian economy, and we witnessed huge gains in this direction. So at the same time, the non-farm jobs also, they began to grow at the rate of 7.5 million per annum. And before that, between 1993 to 2000, the employment in the non-farm jobs were growing only at, we can say, 3 million per annum, but now it was growing at 7.5 million per annum. So this shows that there was a shift of 5.5 million workers on an average out of the agriculture sector towards the non-farm sector each year. So this is, we can say, showing a very nice improvement outwards from the agriculture. And basically we are just saying that this data is very important, clearly showing that structural change was happening when workers, we can say, when labor surplus was moving out of the agriculture towards the non-farm sectors. So for the first time ever, the absolute number of farm workers now fell in India, as that was seen during the rapid structural transformation. So now, that is, we can say, around 2004, we see that absolute number of farm workers was also falling in the agricultural sector. Now with the surplus labor in the agriculture, it has decreased, and it led to rise in the real wages in the rural areas, because surplus labor is now out of the agricultural sector, which led to rise in the real wages of the farmers. So with the rise in rural wages, that resulted in urban wages also rising in a ratchet effect. So this is known as the ratchet effect, and it contributed it was contributed by the non-farm job growth. So basically, with the increase in the real wages of the rural sector, we saw that the real wages of the urban sector also increased, which led to the growth of non-farm job also. So this led to the rising personal consumption. When obviously you're earning higher amounts, you will be consuming more. So that's why we can say the personal consumption demand also increased, which caused a fall in the numbers of poor people also. So during this time, we can say how things, you can say, they are connected and they are happening in a chain. So with that, people were demanding more, and we also saw that the poor people, that basically the poverty rate in India also fall. So poverty line, it had fallen since 1973, from 55% in 1973 to 27% in 2004. So that's how we can say the poverty rate declined from 55% to 27% by 2004. And as the non-farm job growth, it fell. But now, see, till here, things were happening very nicely. They were looking very rosy, and they were going in the desired direction. But after 2013, we again saw that the non-farm job growth, it started falling, and the rate of exit from the agriculture also started falling, because now the employment opportunities in the non-farm areas were less, and that's why now people, they were not willing to move out of agriculture. So even that rate fell down. Now the GDP growth fell sharply from 2016 for each quarter until the COVID-19 broke out. The GDP was also falling. The employment opportunities in the non-farm job sectors was also falling post 2013, and the rate of exit from agriculture was also falling. So we can say things starting, they started to reverse after 2013, and that caused massive reverse migration. So now we are seeing that after the COVID-19 round, once there was a COVID outbreak, we saw a massive reverse migration on historically unprecedented scale, which has not been witnessed ever before. And in 2019, the number of workers in the agriculture was 188 million, and in the middle of 2020, that number, it had risen due to the reverse migration by 45 million. So we can say that again, basically the workforce, or the number of laborers in the agriculture, grew at an unprecedented scale. Basically, the changes that we had witnessed, the structural change that we were seeing, that we had seen a shift of labor surplus out of the agriculture. Now things, they again went back to the square one, and we are again at that same situation after COVID-19. And for anyone believing that the migration, it had reverted to cities in 2021 away from the agriculture, so the data shows, the NSO data is showing up a surprise that in 2021, 7 million additional people, they were working in the agriculture compared to 2020. So if we believe that once the situation was normal, people would have been migrated again back to the cities. However, instead of happening that ways, more people migrated to agriculture sector. Basically, 7 million additional people, they migrated to agricultural sector in 2021, and the trajectory of the structural transformation of 2004 to 2012 has not only been stalled, but it has been reversed. So I hope you have understood the entire scenario, the entire changes, how we were moving ahead, how slow was the pace when we talk about the structural change that was happening in the Indian economy, and suddenly how we saw a boom, we can say, towards the non-farm sector. And because of COVID-19, we are again back to the square one. We are again back to where we started from. So that was the entire thing. And this is, I'm again repeating, it's an extremely important article. Please note down all the important data, all the important, we can say, information, and how changes happened in the Indian economy. And this becomes very crucial for economy and agriculture. And there are few more articles. Let's discuss them also. So member of RBI's monetary policy has to say, monetary policy committee, that is Jayant R. Verma, so he has to say that India's economic growth is now extremely fragile, and that needs all the support it can get, because private consumption and the capital investment, they are yet to pick up. So that's why he's saying that our growth is extremely fragile. So that is one of the view, and you should be knowing about this. So that's it for today. Thank you for joining Ansarkari, and I hope you've enjoyed, you have understood well all the topics, all the articles that we discussed today, and the article from the Financial Express becomes very important. So you'll be getting the PDF link in the description box. You can go through that. You'll be getting certain new information there as well. And keep revising things. Thank you for joining Ansarkari again, and see you tomorrow.